Brothers and sisters of Burkina Faso and of the wider world, friends of justice and defenders of human dignity, I stand before you today not as an instrument of revenge, not as a voice of hatred, but as a voice of conscience, a conscience shaped by the history of our peoples, by the memory of colonized lands, by the faces of mothers who have lost sons and daughters in wars that never should have been fought. I speak because a great many of our world's leaders now speak with a contempt so blunt and a confidence so certain that they imagine threats and brutalities can put out the flames of an enduring human cry for freedom. Recently, a leader of great power publicly pledged to bring a fast, furious, and brutal end to a resistance movement, to finish a name that for millions is shorthand for a people suffering. Such a declaration is not just a tactical warning, it is a language of domination that has been used for centuries to justify the heaviest violences against the weakest. It is the language of those who presume to decide who has the right to live freely and who does not. Let me be plain. Threats of annihilation, even dressed as strategy or national security, are dangerous. They normalize impunity, they invite escalation, and above all, they do not resolve the profound injustice at the root of conflict. Those of us who have known forced borders, stolen resources, and the arrogance of external powers must say loudly and clearly that the world cannot solve deep political wounds with bombardment alone. We in Burkina Faso are a people who remember. We remember the extraction that left our lands poor and our peoples desperate. We remember the treaties made by men who held pens while others held swords. We remember young men and women who died so that our children would not carry the same burdens of hunger and humiliation. That memory obliges us to stand on the side of justice and to speak for diplomacy, for law, and for the humanity of civilians who never asked to be the battleground of someone else's power struggle. To the leader who promises to finish an armed group, understand what words of annihilation do in the world. They harden hearts, they embolden those who would answer violence with more violence, and they close the narrow doors of negotiation that remain. You may believe that military might alone can secure a lasting peace, but history teaches otherwise. Military occupation, endless siege and scorched earth produce only more trauma, more revenge and more generations growing up with a sense that nothing but force will ever answer their loss. I do not defend acts of terror. I do not celebrate violence. I condemn attacks that target civilians, wherever they originate. Let there be no doubt, the deliberate murder of non-combatants is a crime against humanity and must be condemned, but condemnation must be coupled with analysis and with remedies that address the deep causes of conflict, dispossession, statelessness, blockade, humiliation, and the absence of political horizons for ordinary people. When a powerful leader's rhetoric suggests the ending of a people's movement by force, we must ask, what are the alternatives you propose? Where is the plan to bring the hostages home and to restore a life of dignity to the besieged? Where is the plan to rebuild shattered hospitals, to reopen supply lines, to allow agriculture and trade, to guarantee access to clean water and medicine? Threats without a plan to heal will only make wounds incurable. We must also speak to the hypocrisy that often shrouds the use of force. The same nations and leaders who champion the sanctity of life when convenient have at other times sanctioned wars, interventions, and economic punishments that decimate societies. To wield moral certainty selectively is to make justice a tool of convenience. Those who truly seek peace must be consistent in condemning all illegal violence and in demanding accountability from all actors who abuse power. To the peoples living in Gaza, the West Bank, and across the region, who have endured siege, blockade, and repeated waves of destruction, my message is one of solidarity. Your suffering is known to us, your resilience humbles us. No decree of finishing can erase your past, nor can it silence the legitimate aspirations for dignity, recognition, and a place in the world where justice is not reserved for the powerful. We stand with the innocent, who are deprived of food, medicine, and shelter. We stand with the mothers who bury their children, and with the children who bury their futures. To our African neighbors, to the Arab world, and to all nations that cherish sovereignty and the right of peoples to determine their own fate, this moment demands unity, not a unity of weapons or of blind alliances, but a unity of purpose. Let us come together to insist upon ceasefires that are meaningful, on neutral mediators who are trusted by both sides, and on immediate corridors for humanitarian aid without political obstructions. Let us demand prisoner exchanges, investigations into civilian casualties, and processes that address the legal and political status of the occupied. This is not naive diplomacy. This is pragmatic realism. War without a political horizon is a disease. It eats at the foundations of societies and spreads instability across regions. The Middle East is connected to Africa, to Europe, to the Americas. Destabilization in one place spills into another through refugees, through the spread of armed networks, and through the poisoning of diplomatic relations. The voices of those who call for annihilation do not weigh these consequences. They measure success in headlines and territorial gains, but long-term security is built by institutions, by rebuilding, and by fairness. To the young people around the world who watch leaders threaten with tweets and sound bites, do not let the spectacle of power compress your moral imagination. Power is not merely dominance, it is responsibility. It is the capacity to protect the vulnerable. It is the duty to seek justice in a way that endures beyond the immediate headline. Do not be seduced by the myth that brute force brings lasting peace. History will judge those who choose convenience over justice. I remind the international community, the United Nations, regional organizations, civil society, and faith communities, that our obligations here are not optional. When civilians are starved, when hospitals are bombed, when schools are turned into graveyards, the international community must not be reduced to commentary. It must act with courage, by insulating aid corridors from politics, by demanding independent investigations into alleged violations of the laws of war, and by using the levers of diplomacy to create conditions that favor life over annihilation. Soft power must be used with the same vigor we reserve for hard power. Economic pressure, legal measures, and collective diplomacy can be instruments of restraint, and can push parties toward meaningful engagement. To my own country, Burkina Faso, and to all African nations, let us not be pawns of external narratives. Let us build our foreign policy on principles, not on invitations that seek to bind us to the interests of a few. Sovereignty is not a slogan, it is a practice. It demands that we preserve our autonomy, that we stand by universal principles of human rights, and that we pursue a foreign policy that protects our citizens and upholds justice abroad. Some will say, but Captain Traore, do you not fear the might of the powerful? Yes, I know the unequal balance of forces. I know the reach of dollars, of satellites, of arms deals. But fear cannot be the currency of our diplomacy. Courage born of principle can move mountains. We may not be able to change every leader's rhetoric, but we can change the terms of moral debate. We can mobilize international law, convene neutral mediators, strengthen the African Union's voice, and partner with other like-minded nations to craft a multilateral response that prioritizes human life. And let me address directly the argument that extreme measures are necessary because all else has failed. This argument treats people as problems to be removed rather than as human beings with legitimate grievances. It mistakes the symptoms for the disease. Yes, we must confront militancy and terrorism with intelligence, with targeted operations that respect international law, and with justice for victims. But the long-term solution is a politics that allows a people to exist with civil rights, political representation, and human dignity. Strip away political horizons, and you bake radicalization into the next generation. There is another dimension often ignored in these public threats, the moral standing of those who deliver them. A leader who threatens annihilation forfeits moral high ground. It is very hard to claim the mantle of justice when your words signal the acceptance of mass suffering as legitimate tool. Moral authority is not given, it is earned by consistent respect for human life, and by the institution building that prevents crimes before they occur. So what do I propose in concrete terms? First, immediate and unconditional humanitarian corridors, food, water, medical supplies, and fuel must be allowed to reach civilians without delay, without obstruction, and without being used as a bargaining chip. Second, an independent international commission to investigate alleged violations of international humanitarian law, with the authority to recommend sanctions or legal measures where crimes are found. Third, a renewed push for hostage negotiations, mediated by impartial parties trusted by both sides, coupled with guarantees for prisoner exchanges and the safety of aid workers. Fourth, a timeline and framework for reconstruction led by international partners with local oversight. Rebuilding schools, hospitals, homes, not as trophies of reconstruction contracts, but as the foundations of society restored. Fifth, a regional security architecture that includes neighboring states and regional bodies to prevent spillover and to create joint mechanisms for border security that do not target innocent populations. Sixth, a political process with the genuine involvement of Palestinian civil society, recognized leaders, and international guarantors to explore long-term solutions, a horizon of diplomatic recognition, economic integration, and human rights protections. These are not dreams. They are the practical steps that can reduce the violence and open space for a sustainable peace. They require pressure on those who prefer bombs to ballots, on those who trade headlines for responsibility. Some will accuse me, and others like me, of being naive. They will ask, is this realpolitik? My answer is realpolitik without ethics is short-sighted. Power without responsibility is a risk to the entire world. The 21st century will not be ordered by unilateral declarations of force. It will be ordered by networks of cooperation, by enforceable law, and by moral clarity. Finally, I address the citizens who suffer in conflicts near and far, to those who live under siege, who count every meal, who count every night with fear. You are not forgotten. Our solidarity is not a slogan, it is an obligation. We will raise our voice in assemblies and forums. We will call for humanitarian assistance. We will refuse to normalize rhetoric that treats annihilation as an option. We will lift our prayers and our petitions, and we will stand with those who seek to rebuild lives from ruins. To the powerful, remember that history remembers more than immediate victories. It records the moral choices of leaders. It remembers the houses rebuilt. Yes, but it will remember also the leaders who chose restraint when they could have chosen annihilation. Choose wisely. Choose the route that leaves doors open for dispute resolution and for the dignity of civilians. Choose the route that invests in futures rather than in final solutions made of rubble. To the men and women who lead armies, I say this. The strength of a state is not measured by its capacity to destroy, but by its capacity to protect the vulnerable, to provide for the hungry, and to reconcile former enemies into civic life. Soldiers are not instruments of permanent destruction. They can be presences that secure the space for peace, for relief, and for reconstruction. To our partners in the international community, to the United Nations and regional organizations, to legal institutions and humanitarian agencies, be relentless. Use every instrument at your disposal to prevent a spiral of violence. Sanctions targeted at those who escalate, legal measures against those who commit war crimes, and diplomatic levers to create space for negotiation. These are necessary. Also remember that impartiality matters. When you fail to condemn the destruction of civilians by any side, you lose moral standing to demand restraint from others. I speak as a son of Africa, but my voice is not limited to its borders. Our struggle for dignity at home compels us to speak for dignity everywhere. When foreign powers use language of annihilation, they undermine the moral architecture that protects us all. Today it may be a foreign land under threat. Tomorrow it could be your country, your city, your neighborhood. Tyranny of any sort begins with words that make the suffering of others tolerable. As we move forward, let our diplomacy be relentless and our compassion tireless. Let us back negotiations with binding guarantees, and let us back guarantees with international oversight. Let us be practical and principled, and let us make it clear that in the modern age, no state, no movement, no people can be reduced to a tweet or an ultimatum. Human life and human dignity remain the ultimate metrics of legitimacy. In closing, I call upon every leader who still values multilateralism, every citizen who still believes in law and decency, and every young person who longs for a future free of perpetual war. Raise your voices. Demand that threats to finish a people be replaced by tangible plans for peace and justice. Insist that the machinery of global governance be used to protect the vulnerable, and never accept the lie that might makes right. We live in a world of many wounds, but we are not helpless. Through collective restraint, through international law, through humanitarian urgency, and through political imagination, we can build a safer world, not by ending names, but by ending the conditions that produce endless cycles of hurt. May justice guide us, may compassion accompany our policies, and may the rights of every person to live with dignity and security be the lodestar of our diplomacy. Thank you. Solidarity forever.